everyone. Welcome to the West Tigers podcast. This is episode number 69. It's Eddie Otto joined by Joel Helms as usual. But tonight we've got a very special guest on board. We've got the inaugural mayor of the Inner West Council and long-time West Tigers tragic and fan, Darcy Byrne. Darcy, thank you for joining us on the West Tigers podcast.
Pleasure to be here, and as I say, first time caller, long time listener. I've really enjoyed what you guys have done in putting this podcast together, and I think there's a lot of Tigers fans out there who are hungry for more information, and I've personally found it really engaging and useful.
Yeah, well, thank you, Darcy. We hope to crank things up, obviously, with the football starting again next week. There's been nothing to watch the last couple of months, so that's exciting, having football back next week, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm apprehensive to have a look at how we come out of the shutdown. I think every football fan would be about their club. But with us in particular, I was feeling very enthusiastic about our season after the first game, and then, pretty disappointed about the smashing that we got against Newcastle in the second game. So it'll be interesting and good to see how we go and see how Harry Grant goes at number 9.
Absolutely. Now, we're going to cover sort of a range of topics tonight. We're going to talk about how you became a fan and some of your favourite players and just a little bit of background on some of the projects you've been involved in, Leichhardt Oval and just the future of the West Tigers. I'm a resident of the Inner West, so a lot of your projects are just up the road from me. I just live up the road from Petersham Oval, which you've, I think, spent $1 million on. And I work at Summerhill Public School, which will use the new Ashfield pool, which has been redeveloped big time. So, that's going well. I think that's ready mid-year, is it?
Yeah, it's on track. It's been there's been no delays through the COVID crisis on the pool, and it's going to be a new $50 million state-of-the-art aquatic centre. And there's potentially a big role that West Tigers can have in the services down there as well. So that's something that we might be able to talk about in the future.
Excellent. Well, the Summerhill kids will be very excited about that pool. But talking about West Tigers, obviously, how did you first become a fan? I'll go back to when the clubs merged back in 2000. Was it you were a Balmain fan before a West Tigers fan?
Well, my strongest, earliest memories are as a 7 and 8-year-old watching the 88 and 89 grand finals and ending up in tears on both days, as many people did. So that's sort of one of the central memories of my childhood. And then so when we got to the merger, as you recall, we'd had many years of decline from there. Like as soon as we lost Warren Ryan and got Alan Jones, and from then on there weren't many good years. And the club was, short of money. So at the time, I think like a lot of fans, I thought, well, if it's a choice between this or going out of the comp, Wests are not a bad partner. Better than Parramatta, as had been proposed at the time. That would have been a takeover of us. And I think over time, the vast majority of fans have concluded that what really matters is we've got a viable franchise in the NRL, which is West Tigers. Doesn't matter whether you went for the Tigers or the Magpies before. And there's a whole generation of fans who've only been born in the West Tigers era, and they're the most important ones of all. So we've got to look at the opportunity rather than looking backwards.
Well, let's look backward just quickly, Darcy. If we can go back to that fateful day in September 1989, you're 7 or 8 years old. I was, I think, 10 or 11. Terrible day, wasn't it? Do you remember that day and how it unfolded for you? Do you remember where you watched the game?
I remember 1988, I think I watched at Dick's Hotel with my family in Balmain, in the middle of Balmain. And 89, I'm just trying to remember if I was at the League Club or not. I don't think I was, but I was at a pub in Balmain. And look, I think most Tigers fans look back at that and go, well, the whole future of our club and, if you care enough about it, of my life might have been different if we had won that day. And also just the fact that there were so many great players in that team who then never won a comp. Never got to win a competition. So that I think that still rankles with everyone. And anytime I hear Bill Harrigan's name and people start sledging in my mind, it's cheering.
Yeah. Don't remind me of that Bruce Maguire incident. It still haunts me.
Yeah, I mean, Darcy, did it feel? I was a Balmain fan. I mean, I don't remember the '89 grand final too well. I was only, I think, 4 years old, but my mum's never really got over that, even 30 years later. But was it straight away, sort of, when the merger happened, were you as embedded in West Tigers, or some fans took a while to sort of feel as passionate about it? I sort of, because I played all my sport in the inner West and played AFL for West, it was sort of a natural merger. But was it straight away all systems go, or did you have to sort of look at it and go, is this feel the same?
Oh yeah, no, I never thought twice about whether we would get behind it, whether it was something that I would support. I mean, Wayne Pearce was heavily involved at the time, so it wasn't like you're going to stop supporting Wayne Pearce if you've grown up as a Tigers fan in the local area. And I think the truth is there's still a small number of very passionate people on both sides who, a lot of whom had contributed to either West or Balmain as members and as volunteers and supporters who still feel bitter about it. And that's fair enough. I mean, I think if you look at what happened to North Sydney fans, that's one of the great travesties of rugby league. You've got a whole lot of people out there who used to be passionate supporters of rugby league who just stopped following the game because their team got done over and removed from the competition. So it's only natural that people still feel upset or passionate about it, but you've got to look at would Balmain or West standalone still be in the competition now? Probably not, unless we'd had a Russell Crowe or someone like that come along, and that hasn't happened for the Tigers, even though we've been a joint venture. So there's a lot of good opportunities for us given the region that we cover now, rather than thinking about what could have been.
Well, we'll talk a little bit more about West Tigers specifically in a few moments' time. But Darcy, you're probably about the same amount of years that you've put into the club as me, about 35 years when you look at it. Who's your favourite players from the Balmain days and the West Tigers days?
Well, Wayne Pearce was my hero when I was a kid. I think there's a lot of people in that category, knowing that I lived in Balmain when I was a kid. So it's still a pretty working class place then. Like it was gentrified, but there was a real mix of professionals and labourers and wharfies and people from blue collar backgrounds. And Wayne Pearce was absolutely a cult figure and a local hero, as his book was named. And so that's one of my most distinct memories of childhood, is what a significant figure he was. But there were so many people in that team who all had their own personalities and identities and were the best in their position in the competition, including Gary Jack, who I remember cheering on very avidly when I was little. And going back before that, my parents bought me a toy tiger, which they named Larry, for Larry Corowa, who I don't remember playing, but from what I'm told and the videos I've seen and so on, was just a freak. The best attacking player in the competition on the wing. So they're my most distinct memories. And I guess the other thing is just remembering that we had the toughest pack in the comp back then. That's actually what we were known for, was having half the Australian pack. So we've never really had that since. That's been there's been a complete change in our identity. Now, in 2005, it worked pretty well, but for most of the rest of the time, it hasn't. So I like what Michael Maguire's doing, bringing that back now, that just to get a pack that's heavier, deeper, with more depth and more athleticism. We need that. Every fan.
Thumbs up on that, definitely.
I think Joel's been banging on about that for 18 months, Darcy, about having a bigger, stronger, nastier pack. And I think, like you said, there's some young guys there coming through, Thomas McKaylee and a few of those guys who are, I think, Madge's style of football is all about winning the middle of the field. And I think that's why we've struggled for a lot of the past decade. But just on your favourite players again, my favourite player growing up was probably Tim Brasher. That's who I used to pretend to be in the primary school yard. But from a West Tigers perspective, there were obviously a lot of guys who started their careers at Balmain and West. Some of those guys like Mark O'Neill and Steve Georgalis and Darren Senna and John Scandalis, some of those loyal guys who some of them made it to 2005. And then obviously we've had guys like probably our two most famous players, Benji Marshall and Robbie Farrer, and guys like Hodjo and Chris Lawrence. And do you have a standout out of any of those?
John Scandalis was always my favourite player through that era. Even before we won the comp, he was just in a small pack, and he wasn't actually a big forward himself. He just had so much heart, and he was so tough. And then when we did win in 2005, he was such a central part of it, and then carried us, through a lot of tough times afterwards as well. So there's a lot of attacking players you could talk about. And Gareth Ellis, I think stands out in everyone's mind as the best forward that we've had since that era in '89 and so on. But yeah, I've always liked Scando, and I love the fact that Benji has come back and has created this whole new legacy for himself now. Which just wouldn't have been there if he hadn't come back and done what he has done for the club over the last couple of years. I think that's a really good story, and the fact that you can see his concern for the club is genuine. It's not something that's going to stop after his career, that he's going to be part of the place for a long time. I think that's a big strength for us, and it gives me a lot of respect for what he's done.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Good for Benji and good for West Tigers. Darcy, the name Darcy Byrne has been linked very heavily over the last decade to the redevelopment of Balmain Leagues Club. It's been, I think if you go back to 2010, nobody would have seen just what a huge and ongoing drama this was going to prove to be. It's a shame that it still doesn't look to be, in some ways, closer to getting a club back there in Roselle.
Yeah. Well, look, as I say to people, there's no issue in public life that I've had more conversations with other people about than this. And the truth is, it's been a very long, painful, drawn-out saga with no good outcome so far. And there's a lot of blame that can be thrown around. A lot of different parties who could have done a better job to try and get it through, including the owners of the site. For the vast majority of the time. And the truth is that what was proposed for the vast majority of the time since the club has left was ridiculous overdevelopment, 32 stories at one point, in the middle of low-rise Roselle, which has not been approved by the state government. The main reason that the several iterations of the proposal have been refused is because RMS, Roads and Maritime Services, have put in ultra-strong submissions against it because it interferes with the traffic on Victoria Road, which is the main thoroughfare in Sydney. So that's been the problem. The really sad part is that for people such as myself who've always fought for a sensible development there that would see the club return to its spiritual home, to respect the role that the football club has played in building the institution over time, to now have got to the stage where there is a more sensible proposal that has been approved by the council and which can proceed tomorrow for a 12-storey development which includes the Leagues Club. That can't proceed at the moment because the state government is looking to compulsively acquire the site to build a tunnel to North Sydney. It's the connection to WestConnex that goes across to the north side. And they want to sort of use that site as a mine to build the tunnel, which will be very disruptive to the local community and the public school across the road, but also will just mean that it'll be the death knell of the chances of a club returning to Roselle. What I have relayed to the club very strongly is that I think they have an entitlement to compensation if that land is resumed by the government, whether that's under law or just a moral obligation. This is a $14 billion project, this tunnel. They can afford to pay what would now be West Ashfield, given the merger. They can afford to pay the club out to allow them to be able to use that money for some other good purpose for West Tigers as an institution. Now, that could be an alternate club at a bowling club nearby. There's lots of them that are going under. Or it could be, money that went into Leichhardt Oval, to be frank. But there's got to be some compensation to the West Tigers supporters and the club itself for the fact that the government's now intending to take the land when there's a development approved.
Yeah, I remember, Darcy, back in, I don't know if you were there, but after the grand final in 2005, I was probably only 18, 19, going back to the Leagues Club after the game and having Darling Street cordoned off. And one of the things I remember about being in there that night was some of the ex-players were probably more excited than some of the current players. Guys like Ciro and I think Wayne Pearce and guys were there dancing on the tables and stuff. But I can't remember exactly when it was closed down. But were you there that night, grand final night?
I was at the game and I was on the bus on the way back, and we got to the Iron Cove Bridge, and the traffic just stopped. You couldn't move, so we had to jump out of the bus and walk across the Iron Cove Bridge to the club, and we couldn't get in. Just out on Victoria Road, which was, I think, shut off. Certainly Darling Street was.
Yeah.
That was awesome. I've lived in the area all my life. I've never seen an atmosphere like that before or since. It was an incredible night.
Yeah, good memories. Unfortunately, I missed it. I was interstate, living interstate at the time, but I always kicked myself. But at least we won. That's the most important thing. Darcy, you mentioned the term gentrified. I remember back in the 90s, everybody was talking about the inner west being gentrified, and that means that those people who are coming into that area aren't interested in rugby league. How important is it to the inner west for West Tigers to play in that area?
You can't underestimate the size of the supporter base for the West Tigers in the inner west of Sydney. It's massive. It's not a working class place anymore, but the whole of the inner west is still relatively mixed. You look at places like Ashfield, where the club is located, and Marrickville. Still real social diversity there. A lot of rugby league fans, not just West Tigers fans. There's also quite a smattering of South fans in and around Marrickville. A lot of Canterbury fans, obviously, amongst ethnic communities in particular, in and around Marrickville as well. But my sense is that it's still a big institution in the community, and even people who maybe don't watch rugby league every week, they still are committed West Tigers fans. And of course, a lot of people will jump on the bandwagon if we start winning games and regularly making the finals. And that's the same with any club. It's harder to sustain your membership and support base if you're not playing at the end of the year.
Yeah, I was going to say, Darcy, I think our club, West Tigers, for probably a decade or more, has the potential to be the biggest club in Sydney. I mean, given the fact we've, I think, missed the last 8 final series, the supporter base, I think, is there. It's probably a little bit dormant at the moment, but games at Leichhardt Oval in general, the past 5 or 10 years have been really well attended. There's been sellouts. Me and Joel, I guess, 20 or 30 episodes, we tend to butt heads about home grounds and should we have 1 home ground or 3 home grounds, and I sort of, even myself, I sort of change my mind all the time. But I still think that Leichhardt Oval, I think we've got overall about a 55% win record there. And I know Peter Volandis, I don't know if things have changed given the COVID crisis, but his sort of strategy was to try and build up some of the suburban grounds because he thought that was the best for the product. Your thoughts on that? West Tigers playing more or less games at Leichhardt in the future?
Well, we've delivered a lot of money in investment into Leichhardt Oval over the last few years, which I've been the primary advocate for, and that has resulted in the venue being utilised like never before. It's going gangbusters. We're attracting so much content there: rugby, soccer, rugby league, at all levels, men's and women's. International teams are playing there very regularly. So I'm optimistic about the future of the ground. And I've also, it's been a big part of my political agenda at council has been fighting to keep games there. And the reason is because I know how passionate people are about it. And they're my people, like the people who I depend on for support. And I feel the same way as them. I get the split between Leichhardt and Campbelltown, and I have complete respect for the people of Campbelltown to feel exactly the same way. I think they should insist on 6 games as well. But as I've expressed to everyone involved at the club over a very long period of time, we will not cop losing more games than we already have at Leichhardt Oval, full stop. and fans don't want it. So, and that's, to be fair, that's what everyone at the club has always said the same thing, other than Grant Mayer, who tried to come up with some bullshit, to be frank, about, that it was costing too much to play there. We've never charged the club anything to play there. We pay money to make sure that they can. But he wanted to walk away from Leichhardt Oval, like successive NRL and state government administrations have wanted to as well. And, he got the sack. So I thought that was a good outcome, and we're still playing at Leichhardt Oval. So, look, it's... I went out to Bankwest when we played Parramatta in the first game. I'd be happy to play at Bankwest if the people who run the stadium trust didn't get to decide who we play with, because that's always been the problem, is that they get to choose which games we play at the Olympic Stadium or Bankwest every year. And so Leichhardt gets the dregs rather than getting the games that we really need and want. So I think that's been an ongoing problem. I get that the club has to balance the finances, and the truth is, through government subsidies, those stadiums are able to pay clubs to go and play there. It's not through the private sector, it's because they're so heavily subsidised by the taxpayer. But, under those circumstances, you can understand why a lot of clubs have chosen to commit over 10 years to playing a lot of games out there.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? And then even if you look at Leichhardt Oval, Darcy, I mean, I remember Steve Noyce saying, well, when we play at Leichhardt, we have to get the digital television, which costs us $100,000, and there's all these fees and costs. And then if you do change Leichhardt and bring it up to stadium status or make it bigger and better and shinier, then you might just sort of lose what's special about it as well. And it's a tightrope that you walk, isn't it, with it?
Yeah, I'm hopeful, as was suggested. I think Volandis could be a force for good here. He's on the public record from the very beginning of his administration saying that there needed to be a change of course on support for suburban grounds. And the truth is, the reason that there's been no money for suburban grounds is because the NRL wasn't advocating for it. Then state and federal governments could go, if the peak body's not even asking for the money, then why would we do it? So Volandis has said the opposite of that. And look, you're right, we've got to keep the charm and the culture of the place. What we really need, though, is better corporate facilities. That's not popular to say for the fan. I watch every game on the hill. I don't care about the corporate facilities, but it's not profitable for the club if they can't sell more of the high-priced seats. And then we also need more. We need more seating. Now, that doesn't mean we have an extra grandstand on the hill, but we need more. You need to maximise the amount of seating that you can sell memberships and season passes for. So that's a couple of things. There's a lot of other amenities that can be improved there, but the quality of the surface is the thing that's been attracting a lot of football because it's in really good nick, and it has been for quite a long time now. So I'm probably more confident than I have been any time in the last few years that with the new administration that is committed to revitalising suburban grounds, that we could get it done both at Leichhardt and at Campbelltown. And I'd be happy enough to continue with the existing mix, to be honest, if that's what the club wanted to commit to. But my preference would be 6 games at Leichhardt and 6 games at Campbelltown.
Okay. Yeah, I know it's an interesting one, because I think for years the NRL have almost wanted to follow a path like the AFL do, where they use the 2 big stadiums for all the clubs. But I'm no expert in Melbourne, but I think it's a little bit easier to sort of get around there. Whereas if you move sort of a Manly or a Penrith or a Cronulla or West Tigers into one of those bigger stadiums, I just don't know if it would have the same effect.
No, I agree. Melbourne is different to Sydney. And they also have, bigger attendances, so there's more atmosphere regardless. So the atmosphere is not a problem. Whereas here, because no one wants to go to those places, the atmosphere is the central problem, including for the TV channels. They don't like telecasting games from there, because you can tell while you're watching the TV that there's only 15,000 people in an 80,000 seat stadium.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, isn't it? Yeah, something that often is overlooked, because theoretically, when and Eddie and I have hit this ball over the tennis net 1,000 times. If you're playing in the best stadium, you've got the best facilities, it makes the club look bigger. But then if you've only got 20,000 and people are watching it on TV, you can tell there's no atmosphere, and you can tell that there's a hell of a lot of empty seats. So it's just one of those. The whole thing is the whole chicken and egg scenarios, and I don't think we're ever going to work out anything perfect. But I think if some investment could be put into Leichhardt and to Campbelltown, like I could foresee, and I've always foreseen up that northern end of Leichhardt, the opportunity for some corporate sort of facilities and infrastructure there, perhaps. And Campbelltown could probably do it a bit more as well. But maybe you could do a 5 and a 5 and play a couple of big marquee games against a local rival like a Parramatta or a Bulldogs at ANZ, something like that. But then you come back to, well, you listen to the fans, and ultimately you've got to do what the fans want as well. So yeah, it's 20 years on, and I don't think we're any closer to any panacea of perfection there.
No, and there's bigger issues to face in rugby league right now than that, given the effects of the crisis on the code. So I guess that's something we can worry about another day.
Yeah, because just finally on Leichhardt Oval, Darcy, did you have a favourite place to sit at the ground or favourite memory for the ground? I remember being there for I wasn't there for Wayne Pearce's last game, but I think I was there for Ciro's last game in the pouring rain. I think Balmain's last ever game there was a win against Parramatta, and the thing I was most disappointed of this year was it was the first time I think in 13 years we've played South at Leichhardt Oval, and that would have been a sellout within a day of tickets going on sale, but I assume there'll be no one there for that. But do you have a standout Balmain or West Tigers moment at Leichhardt Oval?
Well, I remember in 1989, I think we were actually coming fifth going into the last round or something like that. Like it was, if we lost to Penrith, we could be out, or if we beat Penrith, we could have been on top, I think maybe of the ladder. I can't remember, but it was a massive game.
Yeah.
And I think that's still the ground record.
Yeah,
from
23,000.
Yeah, which was very unsafe, I'm sure, having looked at some of the videos now. You talk about OH&S today, in the past back then. I was in the grandstand that day, and I remember sitting on the stairs, and that's a pretty distinct memory. I remember the day that Gary Jack and Steve Roach retired on the same day.
Yeah.
I remember Junior retiring, but I was a bit younger then. So all of those things, but also I was the person who renamed the hill as the Wayne Pearce Hill.
Yeah.
So that was something I proposed at council and got it through, got support for it. And so on that day, to get to talk to Wayne and so on in the lead up to it, I don't think my youngest daughter wasn't alive then, but my oldest daughter was, taking her out on the ground. And we did a broadcast with Steve Roach talking about the importance of Wayne Pearce and what he'd done for the club and his career and so on. That was pretty cool. And I still get a buzz out of seeing, there's one of those Fox shows, rugby league shows, where they have the Wayne Pearce Hill as the backdrop to every episode. And every time I see it, I'm like, how good's that?
Robbie on the scoreboard, I think that might be the Professor or one of the shows late night on Fox.
Yeah, I like all those shows. I reckon they're really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that 80. So there were two games against Penrith late in the season at Leichhardt, 88 and 89. And 88 had something to do with finishing fifth, and I was there for the 89, that huge game. And I think in 88 there was a couple of players sent off, but in 89, that 23,000, you're talking about sitting on the stairs. My father and I stood on the last row of stairs up the Latcham Robinson grandstand and watched the game. Yeah, I'll always.
There you go.
Yep.
Yeah, that was incredible. What about you guys? What would you say your favourite Leichhardt Oval memory is?
Probably about. I'm trying to think of a West Tigers one. It's been. The problem is, Darcy, the last couple of years, all the biggest games we've lost. The last game of the year against Canberra and against Cronulla. The one where Robbie Farah kicked a field goal once in Golden Point. I was there on a Monday night game against Newcastle. And there was one against Cronulla, first round. I think it was a sellout in 2012. Benji Marshall kicked a field goal in Golden Point. So they're two that spring to mind straight away. I don't know about you, Joel.
Yeah, well, definitely that 89 game against the Panthers. The return to Leichhardt after a couple of years at Parramatta in 1997. We faced the premiers, Manly, and I don't think we beat them. I think we drew with them, but there was like 16,000 fans, and it was just great to be back at Leichhardt. And then in the West Tigers days, you know, I've got as much as there's been some really good performances and good wins, I'm going to go back to the very first West Tigers game, which was that trial match played against
Northern Eagles.
Northern Eagles or Manly. I can't remember if it was,
Northern Eagles.
We smashed them. And I'm thinking to myself, how good is this? You know, we're going to be great. I was a little bit off.
Well, we've got to make sure there's more of those memories in the future, I guess.
Exactly. Well, Darcy, thanks so much for your time. It's been great to get your insight and get to know a little bit more about you. And thanks on behalf of all West Tigers fans for the work that you do for the club, and it is appreciated. And we can see that you're a true Tigers man.
Well, thanks again for your effort in setting up the podcast, which I'll continue to be a listener to. And I think the more that we can get this sort of community around the West Tigers, that's not just about the people the staff at the club, but you know, the whole volunteer and supporter base, get people involved in things like this, the better it will be for the club and the more fun we'll all have in supporting our team.
I was just going to say quickly, Darcy, do you have a prediction for this season? I think most Tigers fans sort of think could be similar to the last couple on the fringe of the eight. I think we've personally got the right people in charge now, someone like Michael Maguire, and he's starting to slowly turn over the roster, get rid of some of the maybe contracts that weren't so in favour of the club. Do you think we can push for finals this year, or do you think it might be a year or two away?
Predictions in football, they're the same as predictions in politics. You know, no one ever gets held to account for them. I said when Donald Trump became president of the United States, let's stop trying to make predictions about anything. And it's a bit like that as a Tigers fan, isn't it? You don't want to jinx anything by trying to get ahead of yourself. I guess what I would say is I think both Maguire, Pascoe and Lee Hadjipantelis, I hope I pronounced that correctly. I think that's really strong leadership at the club. I've seen Lee speak a few times and I've had a couple of conversations with him. He's a very impressive person. He's very passionate about the club. And to have the major sponsor and the chair of the board in the one person, that's a setup that's worked for a lot of other rugby league clubs when you get the right person in that sort of role. So that's all good. I think that's all, you know, really good signs in terms of the culture. I'd be really interested to see how Harry Grant goes on the weekend or next weekend, because as I think you've said it quite a few times, that's a big hole for us. You know, if we don't have a top flight hooker, then it's really hard to go from 9th into 8th.
Yeah.
Or from 7th into 6th. So we really need that. And I expect that someone who's been an understudy to Cameron Smith, of all people, will be pretty organised, disciplined, know how to direct a team around the park, and be a very good professional. So that's I've never seen him play, but that's all we've heard. So if that's the case, I'm pretty confident about being in the top 8. But that's a big question mark, I guess.
Fingers are crossed. Fingers are crossed.
Thanks again for your time, guys.
Thanks, Darcy.